So hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining Audubon Great Lakes and My Birds webinar, Demystifying Michigan's Wetland Wonders, St. Clair Flats State Wildlife Area, this lunch hour. Please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat box, and please ask us any questions or submit your comments in that chat box as well. And I'll just kick things off. So my name is Erin Ford, and I want to welcome you to our webinar today, our Audubon Great Lakes and My Birds webinar, Demystifying Michigan's Wetland Wonders, St. Clair Flats State Wildlife Area, in partnership with the Wildlife Division of the Michigan Department of Natural Resources and Detroit Bird Alliance. Thank you so much for spending the next hour with us. We are really excited to have you here and hoping that this webinar will be helpful to you all because we know the physical and mental health benefits of experiencing nature are so important for everyone. We're also committed to sharing information about engaging with our public lands and making the outdoors safe and welcoming for everyone. With spring here right now as well, it's a great opportunity to see neotropical migrants, water birds, and secretive marsh birds returning to Michigan and the Great Lakes region. One of the things that you may have heard about this webinar through is the My Birds program. So My Birds is an outreach and engagement program presented by Audubon Great Lakes and the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. And we aim to increase all Michiganders' engagement in the understanding, care, and stewardship of public lands that are important for birds and local communities. There are a few ways you can engage with us in this program, and we will share that with you towards the end of our presentation today. And for those of you who are not familiar with Audubon Great Lakes, we are a regional office of National Audubon Society, and we work across the 5 Great Lakes states to restore and protect birds and the places they need to thrive through on-the-ground conservation, outreach, engagement, and policy and advocacy. We have over 215,000 active members across the region with over 50 chapters and 2 nature centers. So I'm going to be your facilitator today, monitoring the chat box, and we'll be helping to facilitate the Q&A session at the end of the program. This is our housekeeping slide, so just a few things to go over, though I know most of you are very familiar with Zoom now. If you wanted to make sure you're muted for the duration of the webinar, that would be great. And if you have not found the chat function on the Zoom platform, you can click on that chat icon to participate in the chat box. You can either share your questions or comments there, and we'll also be sharing some resources there throughout the webinar. We'll be reviewing the questions you've submitted in the chat box during the Q&A session, and those questions are going to be answered at the end of the presentation. So I'm excited to introduce our guest speakers for today. You'll be hearing from Jenny Fuller, our project coordinator with National Audubon Society, John Darling, the wildlife technician with Michigan Department of Natural Resources out at Harson's Island at St. Clair Flats State Wildlife Area, and Ava Landgraf, the conservation and research coordinator with Detroit Bird Alliance. And our agenda for the day, we're going to go through the state of the birds, give you some background information on important bird areas and Michigan's wetland wonders, of which Harson's Island and St. Clair Flats is one, and then really dig into everything you could wish to know about Harson's Island and how to visit the site and all of the great recreational opportunities that are available there. So with that, I'm going to pass things over to Ava Landgraf.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you, Ava.
Okay, great. Yeah, so in less than a single lifetime, North America has lost more than 1/4 of its birds. This is according to a report in the world's leading scientific journal. Their findings show that 2.9 billion breeding adult birds have been lost since 1970. These losses include iconic species such as eastern and western meadowlarks, favorite feeder birds such as dark-eyed juncos, and popular migrants like white-throated sparrows. The disappearance of even some of the common species indicates a general shift in our ecosystem's ability to support basic bird life. And because of changes in climate, we stand to lose even more birds. So I'm going to pass it over to Jenny to talk about that a bit more.
Yeah, so following up on this pretty alarming trend, Audubon's science team has found that 2/3 of North American bird species are at risk of extinction from climate change. And this report looked at 604 species and found that 389 of these could lose much of their habitat by that they need by 2080, some of these species up to 100%. But the good news is that our science also shows that if we take action now, we can help improve survival for 76% of species at risk. Next slide. So using geographic modeling, Audubon has also found that changing climate is causing North American birds to shift migration timing and has also altered their summer and winter geographic ranges. So luckily, however, stabilizing warming at global average increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius would reduce threats for many birds. In the Great Lakes region, many species are considered vulnerable to climate change under the 3 degrees Celsius temperature increase, including bobolink and common loon. And you can see on the map here how much of the ranges are lost in red on the map. This rapid climate change could lead to population declines and local extinctions if we don't adapt. Now on to the next slide. So one way we are working towards protecting birds is by designating important bird areas for conservation. So Important Bird Area program is a global initiative of BirdLife International, which is implemented by Audubon and local partners in the US. And this program identifies areas that are vital to birds and other biodiversity, and therefore really key areas for conservation. And so the overall goal is to reduce impacts of habitat loss and degradation, especially in these places. And Audubon has identified over 2,800 IBAs covering over 400 million acres of public and private lands in the US. Among them are high priority global IBAs, places like New York City's Jamaica Bay, areas within Alaska's Arctic Slope, and Detroit, Michigan's very own Detroit River and Saginaw Bay. And in Michigan, the Important Bird Area program officially began in March 2006 through a coalition of 4 managing partners. So Audubon, Detroit Bird Alliance, Kalamazoo Nature Center, and Michigan Audubon Society. And coordinator Caleb Putnam assembled a technical committee of state officials and bird experts, and they together devised and applied this rigorous set of criteria. And through this process, we now have identified 103 IBAs, and 10 of those are recognized as globally significant. So in order to become an IBA, the area must support at least one of the following. First is species of special concern, such as threatened and endangered species, species that are vulnerable because they have restricted ranges, species that are vulnerable because they're dependent on a limited habitat type or biome, or species that are vulnerable because they congregate in high densities in just few locations. And in Michigan, 54 of the 103 IBAs are owned and managed by the DNR. These are all open to the public, they're managed for multiple uses, and are areas where there are a variety of bird species really thrive. And in addition, all of Michigan Wetland Wonders double as important bird areas, which John will talk about next.
Cool, thanks, Jenny. Hopefully everybody can hear me well. I'm one of those people having the technical difficulties. I've been the area manager at Harson's Island for 13 years. I live on the island full time. So I've got a lot of familiarity with the area. I'm real proud of it. I'm real proud of what we do there and of the partnership we have with our various partner groups, but especially Audubon. So our Wetland Wonders are what we call our 7 managed waterfowl hunt areas across the state, of which Harson's Island managed waterfowl area is one. Harson's Island is part of the greater St. Clair Flats State Wildlife Area. These areas were originally created to provide some balance between exceptional waterfowl hunting opportunities and minimize the pressure on birds at historic refuge sites. So if you go back into the 50s and 60s, some of these areas were kind of the Wild West, where there was one small refuge area with hunters lining all sides of it at all times. And this managed program was created to kind of provide some balance and safety with where hunters were going to be and provide a little extra refuge to those birds so they weren't facing quite as much pressure when they were coming to these historic refuge sites. Now we manage these to provide waterfowl habitat for both nesting and migration and for the benefit of a lot of other wetland wildlife. So while waterfowl are our specialty on Harson's Island, a lot of other wetland species and some upland species benefit from that management as well. These areas are funded almost exclusively by hunting license fees and taxes on guns and ammunition, but they are free and open for anyone to visit, use, and enjoy most of the rest of the year. There's no sort of area access fee or anything like that right now that anybody has to pay. Outside of our restricted dates, anybody can come out anytime. So as Jenny said, all 7 of our managed waterfowl hunt areas are considered important bird areas by Audubon, but so are many of our other managed wetlands. So we do have areas that are intensively managed wetland sites that do not have that component of the managed hunting. So especially like the areas in UP, Portage Marsh, and Muskogee Bay are really, really important stopover wetland areas, but they don't have the same level of hunting pressure and they don't have that restrictive hunting access program going on there either. These areas are known for supporting breeding populations of a lot of vulnerable marsh birds, but especially black terns, least bitterns, some of our rail species are found almost exclusively at some of these managed wetland sites. And they're well known for supporting high concentrations of ducks during fall migration. That's obviously our calling card at the managed areas. Each of our 7 managed waterfowl hunt areas will hold upwards of 10,000 ducks. The highest I've ever seen at Harson's Island is about 40,000. Back in the 90s when duck numbers were higher, we'd have 60 or 70,000 ducks here at one time in our refuge. So a whole lot of ducks are coming through the state at any given time. We're an important kind of meet up between the Atlantic and Mississippi flyways for waterfowl. So there's a ton of ducks moving through and we provide a lot of area for them. So Harson's Island is part of the greater St. Clair Flats Delta. It is the largest freshwater to freshwater delta in the world. There are obviously other bigger deltas, but usually those are freshwater rivers going into saltwater bodies. So the St. Clair River dumping into Lake St. Clair is the largest freshwater delta there is. Our land ownership is composed of approximately 25,000 acres. The vast majority of that is just Lake St. Clair bottomlands. So the state of Michigan owns the bottomlands for most of Lake St. Clair. And then our managed area is only 3,300 acres of that greater 25,000. This provides a lot of important variable habitat across the area because you've got everything from intensively managed sites like at Harson's Island and St. John's Marsh out to the open water the black terns and Forster's terns are using, and some of our more isolated wetland packets out across the flats itself. The IBA is really important for breeding, migrating, and wintering waterfowl. We're unique in that we have large numbers of migrating birds coming through, as well as large number of birds that are breeding here and overwintering here, depending on what conditions are. So there's a lot of variability and a lot of change throughout the year. And we do support some very high densities of some of our rare nesting species, especially black terns on the flats. We're one of the largest colonies for black terns, but also some of those secretive marsh birds like rails and bitterns that can't be found many other places. So some of those other rare species are listed here. We have had king rails at St. John's Marsh. I haven't had a king rail at Harson's, but we have a lot of Virginia rails. Purple martins are all over the island during the summer. Common gallinules are fairly common here, unlike some other places. During the winter, we can have huge numbers of tundra swans on the flats. We're an important flyover destination for tundras both in the spring and the fall. We don't have any of that nest year, but we have some huge concentrations during both migrations. Our diving duck species come through Lake St. Clair in dramatic numbers, and sometimes you can catch those in the flats. A lot of times those birds end up on the Canadian side of the lake, just where there's less boating pressure, both from hunters, but also from fishermen and pleasure boaters. One of the often not thought of consequences of climate getting a little better, a little warmer, is that people are on boats much later than they used to be. So we have fishing pressure on the lake easily into October and November now, and it pushes a lot of those birds that roost and feed out in the middle of the lake over to the Canadian side where there's less pressure. Nearly 200 bird species can be observed here during spring migration. According to eBird, eBird keeps growing here. We don't typically see the really abnormal vagrants that they get at, say, Point Mouillet. But I've had glossy ibis here. We've had reports of Eurasian widgeon. So we do get some vagrants that come through, but we get a lot of quantity. Our calling card here is definitely quantity of birds. So of course, we've got a wide variety of waterfowl here. Mallards, black ducks, pintails are definitely the most common. Wood ducks are all over the place. This year we have a lot of blue-winged teal hanging around. But the ones that excite me the most during the springtime are, we still have ruddy ducks that stick around. So if you've never seen a really plumed out Drake ruddy duck, sometimes you can get lucky and catch one of those here in the late spring, early summer as they're starting to come into their red colors. We have a good shoveler, widgeon, and gadwall migration during the spring. So especially shovelers are really hard to find in Michigan sometimes when they're in their full colors. And all of our managed areas get a pretty good migration of them, but we get a lot that stick around here for quite a long time. They're starting to trickle out now, but late March into kind of the middle of April, there's some good numbers of puddle ducks around. We do have good numbers of shorebirds that come through occasionally, but our most common are definitely greater and lesser yellowlegs. Pretty much any day you come to Harson's Island, I can probably point you to a greater yellowleg somewhere. They seem to like it here. We have had good numbers of dunlins and sandpipers in the past, depending on our conditions, and we are trying to improve some mud flat and shallow water management for those shorebirds. We do get a fair number of songbirds here, but due to our mostly being a wetland area, we don't get the wide variety that, say, an upland area does. So we do get all of these listed songbird species to come through. There's marsh wrens everywhere. We also get kingbirds commonly. And we do have some reports of warblers, but some of our other locations like the Port Huron State Game Area and Wadhams are definitely more of a destination for those looking for some various warbler species. Where songbirds can be picked up here is if you just kind of travel the island, especially out onto the ends of both channels. Sometimes those kind of bigger willows and things that are holding on the end of the island can hold some of those songbird species. In addition to birds, we've just got a wide variety of mammals and herpetiles as well. Of course, like everywhere in southern Michigan, there's white-tailed deer everywhere, but we do have coyotes, fox, raccoons, possums here as well. We're very prolific with muskrats. The local high school's mascot is the muskrat. We're proud of our hairless-tailed friends. And we do have an increasing beaver population. We're starting to hear more reports of otter. So they're harder to get a view on, especially during daytime. Beaver, mostly nocturnal, but it's getting to be more common to see some signs of chewing and see the lodges and stuff. And then there are mink all over the place. We do have a lot of turtles around the island. A lot of people take a lot of pride in the island and moving them out of the road. So they're seen just about everywhere. Painted, snapping turtles, and red-eared are definitely the most common, but we do also have northern map turtles and Blandings turtles. A few different varieties of snakes, but my favorite is definitely the eastern fox snake. It is a state-threatened species, and we're one of the strongholds for the eastern fox snake in the state. So you can see fox snake here probably easier than just about anywhere in the state, and then a wide variety of frogs and toads as well. So Harson's Island is unique in that it is an island. It does require a car ferry to come here. That is definitely the biggest barrier to entry. The ferry is $15 round trip. You got to pay when you come onto the island, and it's free to leave. It is a privately owned company. A lot of people get intimidated by the ferry, but it's a pretty easy process. The deckhands will direct you where to park. And once you're across, it's only about a 3-minute boat ride to get across the river. And unless you're coming on a super busy holiday weekend, there's usually not too bad of a wait. They usually run 2 or 3 boats each day, so they can keep the line down pretty well. As far as the Harson's Island managed area, that's where most of my work occurs, but remember that we're a pretty small blip on the landscape, that 3,000 acres out of that 25,000. But of our managed area, the entire area is open to access January 2nd through August 31st. That's accessed by foot or boat or kayak or canoe. We don't allow any motorized vehicle access on the area. The refuge is closed September 1st through January 1st. That's that window where we're really trying to protect fall migration. And the entire area is only open by permit access only. That's primarily for hunting access, and that's both for us to be able to control numbers and, you know, what kind of pressure is on the birds, but also just for safety. So we know where everyone's at, and we don't want anybody, you know, walking the dikes while folks are actively duck hunting. We are part of the St. Clair and Macomb birding trail, as well as Blue Ways of St. Clair. So we do have some designated kayak paths that go through Musquemoot Bay and through a couple of my managed marshes. So we're pretty kayak friendly, especially earlier in the summer. You know, as you get later in the summer and those submerged weeds start to get a little thicker, it's a little bit of a pain to kayak around anymore. But the marshes are really pretty in the spring, really easy to get in and out of. And then later in the summer, it's easier to get around Musquemoot Bay. As far as our land management here, we are very much focused on waterfowl. So of our 3,300 acres, the vast majority of it is made up of about 2/3 is managed marshes, hemi-marshes, mostly cattail. And the remaining third is about 800 acres of crops that we plant during the spring and flood during the fall for ducks to eat. We plant corn and buckwheat and millet, and the ducks will eat every kernel of buckwheat and millet they can get to. It's easy for them to digest. It provides a lot of nutrition. A lot of people think, a lot of duck hunters think about corn and ducks and how much they must like it, but the reality is that corn is basically a Twinkie for a duck. They like to eat it, but they only really like to eat it when it's cold and they're just looking for fat. So the rest of the time they're looking for small grains or for what we call moist soil plants, which are naturally occurring plants that grow in moist conditions. So those would be some of our sedges, wild rice, a couple different types of rush produce a seed they like, some grasses as well. So we also have units that we manage for those, as well as some of our shallower areas in our marsh units that produce those naturally. We do have water control over almost the entire area, 3,300 acres, meaning that I can pump them bone dry all the way up to about 5 or 6 feet deep, depending on what we want to do. So that gives us a lot of tools to be able to create habitat to ideal conditions and also be able to access areas to treat invasive species and things like that. Phragmites australis is a well-known invasive species that everybody in Southeast Michigan has probably seen, whether they realize it or not. It's the 10 to 15 foot tall stick with a big fluffy frond on top that grows all over the place in wet areas. It's originally from the Mediterranean. It's pretty dominant here in Southeast. It's a very prolific invasive, so we spend a lot of effort fighting frag and trying to improve wetland conditions where we can there. And I'll turn that over to Ava to talk about one of the projects we've done with frag recently.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so there was a habitat management project conducted by Audubon Great Lakes in the fall of 2022. This was funded by the State Wildlife Habitat Grant Program. And this used a large aquatic vegetation cutting machine called a Swamp Devil. You can see it in this lower picture here. And the Swamp Devil cut through the dense strands of invasive vegetation like the Phragmites and also a hybridized cattail species, because both of these plants grow in extremely dense and large swaths that are not ideal for the waterfowl and other marsh birds here. These birds prefer a more patchy mix of vegetation and water, whereas these invasive plants create just like, it's all dense vegetation, which is not ideal. So the Swamp Devil opened up the habitat for the wildlife by cutting down a bunch of this vegetation and then also left behind the cut debris to mimic the muskrat disturbance, how the muskrats will cut down this vegetation to eat it and leave it behind. And this creates a nesting area for a bunch of the marsh birds in the area. This spring, Audubon Great Lakes and Detroit Bird Alliance will continue to monitor the area to learn more about how this work will impact wildlife. And then when monitoring is all wrapped up, Audubon Great Lakes will conduct analysis and share the results. And this is to support the, well, partially to support our Black Terns. And St. Clair Flats has one of the largest Black Tern colonies in Michigan. Used to hold the record for the very largest. In 2013, we estimated around 600 birds breeding in the area, and now that number is closer to 150, kind of hovering around 150, 200 birds in 2023. And there's a large variety of threats to the Black Terns, and we are monitoring to learn more about these threats and see if there's any ways that we can support the birds while they're breeding here. Of course, there's a bunch of predators that the birds are facing. Anything that is big enough will easily eat the chicks or the eggs that are at the nest. Anything from snakes and fish to turtles and mink. There's also disturbance from a lot of the recreational boaters in the area. The nests blend in super well, so a lot of the boaters don't realize that they're speeding by a breeding area for threatened species. So it's easy to accidentally run over a nest or have the boat wake, like push eggs out of the nest. Also, increased weather events can cause severe storms that knock eggs out of the nest and leave chicks wet and cold. With changes in water level, we see a large decrease in nest success during years with higher water level. And then lastly, there's also invasive vegetation, like John mentioned and I mentioned earlier, the Phragmites and the hybrid cattail grow in areas that are too dense for the Black Terns. The Black Terns prefer like the bulrush vegetation, a more like patchy habitat. So a large variety of things are affecting the Black Terns out here. And we have been working to better understand the species, understand the changes in population and the migratory routes. And Jenny will talk a bit more about that.
All right, thanks, Ava. So following up on this, the reason why we have so much information on Black Terns is because Detroit Bird Alliance has been monitoring the area since 2013. So this gives us a really good wealth of data to better understand what's driving population and nesting success in the area. So with additional mapping and some statistical analysis, we found that populations and nesting success really respond to changing water levels. And we found that as water levels rose, the ideal bulrush nesting habitat was flooded out, which reduced their available habitat and made nests a lot more vulnerable to severe storms, breaking apart, and also put chicks at higher risk of aquatic predation. So part of the reason the bulrush was really flooded out was because much of that shallower shoreline is currently blocked by hard seawall structures and dominated by a wall of invasive Phragmites, which is really hard to control. So there's a lot of it there. But the good news is Black Tern nesting success has increased as water levels have returned to around that 2016 level, which has really considerably improved their nesting habitat. And we hope to see populations start to return over time. It might take some time for them to come back. Then another important research project we've conducted with Black Terns here in the Flats is studying fledgling survival and migration routes. So to do this, we use nanotags, which are these tiny radio transmitters, to track their movement from breeding grounds to wintering grounds. These are really harmless. They fall off after a couple of months. And it provides us with some really great data as well. So through this project, we found that fledged young exclusively use the Atlantic coast for migration, especially national wildlife refuges. And in addition, we partnered with Michigan State to develop a population model And this found that the driving factor of overall black tern population decline is adult survival. So this really means it's important to expand our work on their migration route and wintering grounds as well. So one example of this is our collaboration with South Carolina Audubon, which manages an important stopover for black terns. But this doesn't mean it's not important to continue supporting our breeding black terns, especially for conservation in the Great Lakes. And Ava will tell us about how we're doing this at St. Clair Flats next.
Awesome, thanks. Yes, so we have been using trail cameras as nest cameras for a couple years now. You can see in the pictures here over on the right side is how we have the nest cameras set up. They actually are kind of disguised in a little box that looks like a birdhouse so that people don't bother them. And then on the left side is an example of one of the images from the nest cameras. And you can see there's a fox snake in that image and a black tern kind of flying above. So we set up these cameras generally at the beginning of the season on either a time lapse or motion detection setting. And these will go on for a couple of weeks to cover the nesting period. And these are super fun to look through at the end of the season. We've been able to see some interesting interactions and learn some more about the black tern chick development. Something that stood out to me is how long the chicks will hang around the nest if they're not disturbed. We've seen chicks that are about fledging age still over at the nest, about like 2 weeks since hatching. And we've also seen some specific nest predators like the fox snake that we have in the image below. We've also had mink and snapping turtles show up on our St. Clair Flats cameras. And then on another site camera, we had a great horned owl show up. I feel like that's probably our most surprising predator that has shown up on camera. And we have also seen some nests that are disturbed by species that are not trying to predate the eggs or chicks. They're just species moving through, especially like larger waterfowl or muskrat or large turtles. Commonly are just kind of moving across the vegetation mat and looking for a dry spot to hang out for a bit, and they'll commonly just knock eggs out of the nest or just destroy the nest. And we've also seen the nest failing due to weather events, storms, wind, waves, and also, again, like mentioned before, some of the boating that happens in the area. The wake from the boats can also disturb the nest and knock eggs out. So we've learned a lot with the nest cameras, but I think one of the coolest things that we're working on right now is using the nest cameras to learn more about the use of nesting platforms to increase the nest and fledging success. We recently started learning from conservation groups over in the Netherlands, where they have European black terns, where they have had really great success using nesting platforms to support their black terns. They actually have in some areas, like a huge chunk of the population depends on the nesting platforms. We don't necessarily want to get to that point. We are hoping that the platforms can kind of be something that is used during those high water level years when nesting success is generally a little bit lower. The platforms can be a way that we just support those birds during those kind of rougher seasons. So we're testing out a couple different designs that are possible for our St. Clair Flats black terns that kind of mimic the vegetation mat. Right now, Audubon Great Lakes is collaborating with Stantec, an engineering consultant, on a feasibility study. And we're hoping that these platforms can provide some additional protection from like wind and waves, and also help out when the nests start to kind of fall apart, that they can provide a safe, dry spot for the chicks. So we have a cool example over in the larger picture here where you can see the birds. This is a picture from the Nest camera in 2022, where we have the one black tern is sitting on the nest, and the other black tern adult is with a little tiny chick, like a 2-day-old chick, that went over to stand on a platform that was set near the nest. We just put the platform nearby just to see what would happen. And actually 2 weeks later, the nest had fallen apart and the chicks very close to fledging were using the platform as a place just to hang out and stay dry. So we've seen that it is possible for the birds to use these platforms and have some additional safety from them. And then below we have a picture of a newer platform designed by one of our longtime volunteers. This is a canvas platform with some styrofoam in it to make it floaty. And we have had the black terns and also Forster terns interested in this platform, actually kind of caught on camera the pairs of these different species actually fighting over who was going to nest on top of the platform. So this year we'll be setting out a bunch of platforms and seeing how the birds react to them. So yeah, very, very cool stuff happening. Really exciting partnering with everybody on this work.
So one kind of new development that I wanted to make sure people were aware of is that we have been going through a strategic planning effort for our managed waterfowl hunt areas. We're working on a 10-year strategic plan to kind of set some priorities for us moving forward. And this plan will be going out for public review sometime this summer. So Aaron will provide some ways to stay connected to make sure that you get informed when that goes out. Our Gov delivery system will put a blast out saying that it's out for public review as well. So keep your eyes open if you want to provide some feedback on how these areas are managed.
Thanks, John, and we'll pass things over to Jenny.
All right. So how are Wetland Wonders and IBAs funded? So Audubon does not have capacity to support IBA conservation outright. So we rely on partners, landowners, and managers. And in Michigan, this primarily falls on the shoulders of Michigan DNR. And our Wetland Wonders and other managed waterfowl hunt areas are managed by the Wildlife Division.
Yeah, so you can see here in the grand scheme of the DNR, the Wildlife Division is a pretty small slice of the pie. Usually around 90% of our funding comes from sources other than the state general tax fund. This year it's about 12.5% is general tax fund. We've had years where it was less than 5% was general tax fund. For my office, none of the habitat work I do is funded by general tax money. We get a very small amount of general tax money that just goes towards staff time for a couple of projects. But all of the on the ground money I spend is all hunting license dollars. The reason that's important is because we've been seeing a steady decline in hunting since the 1990s. So there was a big boom as the baby boomer generation really got into hunting in kind of the post-war era. So through the 70s and 80s, we had, tons of hunters across the U.S. But since the 90s, we've been seeing about a 2 to 3% decline each year, and that's nationwide. And Michigan usually is about the same. In Michigan, we have seen some increases, especially in women purchasing both hunting and fishing licenses, which is great to see, but it's not enough to offset the overall decline that we are facing. And the reason that's an issue is because it funds most of our management. So we're looking at developing new funding models and ways that we can continue to be solvent into the future because, 2 to 3% decline combined with you face inflation like everyone else is not a great combination.
Thanks, John.
So there are many ways that people. Oh, sorry. I'm up, right?
Go for it, Ava.
Thank you. Sorry, can't see what's going on. There are many ways people who don't hunt can still support these areas, such as purchasing a migratory duck stamp, donating to Non-Game Fish and Wildlife Trust Fund, or the Adopt a Game area program. You can volunteer to be a community scientist or steward at your local public lands, and you can support local conservation organizations and engage with the Wetland Wonders strategic planning effort. And a very specific way that you can be helpful right now is that Audubon Great Lakes needs a couple more volunteers for their marsh bird monitoring at St. Clair Flats. This requires 3 pre-dawn surveys between May 1st and June 15th. Kayaking experience is required for this. And training is coming up this Sunday. So if that is interesting to you, you should definitely click the link in the chat and look into this opportunity, because it is a really great way to experience the wildlife and see some of these more secretive marsh birds. We also have some other upcoming opportunities. Just in time for migration, we have exciting open house events and tours coming up. We have at Nyanquin Point State Wildlife Area, Point Mouillet State Game Area, and Portage Marsh State Wildlife Management Area. And if this webinar has you wanting to visit St. Clair Flats, please come out and join us for the St. Clair Flats State Wildlife Area Open House on June 8th. I will be there, and John will be there, and I think some other folks on this call will be here. And it'll be a great way to enjoy the waterfowl and other birds in the area. So that link is also in the chat if you're interested.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. We are getting ready now to open things up for some questions. So I have a few that were in the chat over to the side that I'll pass over to our speakers. But if you have any other questions you'd like to send in the chat, please do so now. So John, there are a couple of questions for you kind of related to accessibility of the island and kind of hunting. If you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more, we have a couple folks that asked, are there ways or what is the mechanism to advise the state of what birds are at risk so that hunting is restricted? And then similarly, like if populations have declined, why is hunting allowed? And so I'll chime in on that one briefly, just because we did have a slide on that, but didn't include it in the presentation. With that 3 billion birds gone report, one aspect of that report is that it had a silver lining that some bird populations were increasing, and that included waterfowl and wild turkeys and some raptors. So birds where there have been a lot of concentrated conservation efforts, and as it relates to waterfowl specifically, kind of was helped along by waterfowl hunters and having these managed areas around. But John, if you want to chime in on that a little bit more, please do so.
Yeah, so broadly speaking, the species we hunt are studied very intensively. Everything from visual surveys to nesting surveys to banding programs. We have a lot of data showing that the populations that are hunted are doing very, very well. In some instances, they're increasing. We're able to see that they're increasing because of that effort put into them. So our season dates and our bag limits are set by federal biologists with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they usually err on the side of caution. So anytime they see a decline in species, they can adjust what the bag rate is for that, so that there's no additional or unexpected mortality going on from hunting pressure. So with species like pintails, for example, pintails are doing really well in Michigan, but across their flyway, they're not doing as well. So despite us having a lot more pintails than usual, our hunters are restricted to shooting 1 pintail a day, so that Michigan hunters aren't negatively impacting the flyway as a whole. So I don't have any concerns with decreases due to hunting pressure. Some of those issues that, you know, still linger are from the old market hunting days and days when hunting was not regulated in any way. The way that things are currently managed now, the hunting pressure on species does not have any negative impact on population numbers. In terms of providing feedback, if you have a concern over a specific bird species, or you know of an instance where, say, a species of concern is facing some level of hardship or harassment or damage, one of the fastest ways is to just contact your local biologist. You can find a listing of our biologists by county on the website, on the michigan.gov/DNR website, or by contacting your local Michigan DNR customer service center, and then they can forward that request out from there.
Great, thank you so much, John. I wanted to ask also, we had somebody wondering if there were any kayak rental places on the island.
So there used to be a kayak rental place on South Channel. They've since closed, I believe, Middle Channel Marina. If they don't have kayaks, they're talking about getting them. Middle Channel Marina also rents boats. Actually, this group here, we rent a boat every year for a project out there. So if you were looking to do a little bit of a more costly but a more comfortable experience, they rent pontoon boats as well as fishing boats. So that's an option as well. That's Middle Channel Marina. They're on the end of Middle Channel. And if they don't have kayaks, I know they were talking about getting them. So calling there and kind of pressuring them would be a good choice.
Great, thanks, John. And then Ava, related to boating, somebody was wondering if there's a way it could be prohibited, and I know Detroit Bird Alliance and Michigan DNR have chatted about this and wanted to see if you wanted to touch base on signage or other ideas you all had about increasing awareness about that.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, I think the big thing that we're looking at is really just the awareness aspect and making sure people know that there are threatened species breeding out there, and building more of an understanding and developing more of a caring mindset to have people want to support these species, so that people are looking for improving the habitat, and we don't need to set up like prohibitive rules or anything like that. So yeah, just working with the awareness angle is what we're doing.
Great.
Well, one of the other kind of follow-ups on that is with the water levels of Lake St. Clair declining so dramatically, a lot of that boat pressure is going to decline as well. A lot of these areas the terns are in are places where boats can't really comfortably or safely get to. So I expect that some of that damage will decrease as water levels keep going down too.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that addition. We also had a question come in. Could you briefly share like what a mudflat is for those that don't know? Yeah, we're so used to being in the field, but yeah.
Yeah, so when we say mudflat, we mean basically any shallow water area that has some exposed soil. So sandbars, if you kind of picture a sandbar like that, but can also be, you know, a tilled field that has been since flooded by rain would be an example of a kind of like a artificial mud flat. But a lot of those wading bird species like that really short vegetation or old dead vegetation that's been fallen over with water that's like just barely skim water over the top of that substrate. So when we say mud flats, we mean we're trying to mimic that like natural shoreline receding as the lake goes down kind of habitat look. So we can't make Lake St. Clair go down, so we try and mimic that in smaller areas by, you know, keeping water levels just barely right at the surface.
Great, thanks, John. We have a question as well in the chat. Are there hiking trails on the island?
Yep. So all of our dike tops are pretty well maintained and able to be hiked. Right now, depending on which one you're on, you're either going to be walking through a marsh or walking through a currently being farmed agricultural field. So our dikes are accessible to the public for foot access. There's an access point on Middle Channel Drive that has a good trail that goes out kind of right into the middle of the marsh. And then our main dikes right by our refuge kind of get you right out into the heart of things, which right now are pretty low key as we're actively farming, but early in the spring when there's still standing water and the ducks are coming through, they're really easily accessible.
All right, great. Thank you so much. So we are a minute over, and with that, we'll kind of wrap things up. But if you all want to stay in touch with the MyBirds program, you can send us an email directly at mybirds@audubon.org, visit our website, or follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We hope to hear from you and see you in the field at some of these upcoming events. Thank you so much for joining us this lunch hour. The webinar recording will be shared to all who registered after we get it up on our YouTube channel later today. So thank you again so much all. Hope you had a great